cool idea to build. Why didn't I figure it out myself? Let me show you a guide on how to build a tsunami.
Round 1.
I begin by shaping the main tsunami itself, using water blocks to create a wave that rises high above the ground. Instead of making the wave completely flat or symmetrical, I give it an uneven, layered shape so that it looks more like a powerful natural phenomenon. Real tsunami waves are not simply enormous walls of water that maintain one perfect shape from bottom to top. Their appearance changes depending on the depth of the ocean, the shape of the coastline, and how the water moves toward land. By making the Minecraft version irregular and imposing, I can create the impression of a huge amount of water suddenly being pushed toward the shore. The scale is especially important here because the wave needs to look powerful even when compared with the structures around it. A good environmental build often depends on exaggerating the most important feature, and in this case, the enormous height of the wave immediately communicates just how destructive a tsunami can be. The relief of the wave also helps make the structure feel like it is actually moving. If every section had the same height and shape, it would look more like a giant blue wall than a wave. Natural water is constantly changing its form, and large waves develop curved surfaces, uneven crests, and different thicknesses as they travel forward. Although Minecraft's block-based construction makes smooth curves impossible, varying the placement of the water blocks creates a convincing approximation of these natural forms. This is similar to the way artists create movement in sculptures using changes in silhouette and direction. Even without animation, the shape itself can suggest motion. The highest parts of the wave appear to be advancing forward, while the lower sections create the impression of water being pulled upward behind them. This gives the tsunami a much stronger sense of energy and makes it feel like a frozen moment from a much larger natural event. Another important part of the design is the relationship between the wave and the ground below it. A tsunami becomes visually impressive because of the enormous difference in scale between the water and everything caught in its path. For that reason, I make the wave sufficiently tall to dominate the landscape rather than allowing it to blend into the surroundings. In real coastal areas, the destructive potential of a tsunami comes from the huge volume of water involved, not simply from the height of an individual wave. As the water approaches shallow coastal areas, its speed decreases while the wave can grow considerably in height. Minecraft obviously cannot reproduce all of these physical processes, but the oversized structure communicates the same basic idea visually. The viewer can immediately understand that this is not an ordinary wave, but a massive wall of water capable of overwhelming anything beneath it. Once the basic shape of the tsunami is complete, I begin preparing it for the water that will eventually cover the entire structure. To keep the water from simply flowing away in every direction, I place invisible blocks around the edges of the wave. These hidden barriers are one of the most useful tricks for creating large water structures in Minecraft, because they allow the builder to control something that normally wants to spread naturally. Water in the game follows simple rules. Once placed, it searches for available spaces and flows downward or outward whenever there is an opening. That makes decorative water build surprisingly difficult when the goal is to preserve a specific shape. Invisible blocks essentially act like temporary molds, similar to the forms used in real construction to hold liquid concrete in place while it hardens. The difference is that here the barrier itself will never be visible, allowing the finished wave to look as though the water is naturally suspended in the exact shape I designed. After creating those hidden boundaries, I begin pouring water across the wave. This stage is what finally gives the structure the appearance of an actual tsunami rather than a sculpture made from ordinary building blocks. The flowing water interacts with the uneven surface underneath, creating different shades and reflections as the Minecraft lighting changes. In real life, large waves appear so dynamic partly because sunlight interacts with countless changing surfaces of water at once. Even though Minecraft uses a simplified water system, allowing the liquid to cover an irregular structure produces a similar visual effect. The water also hides much of the underlying construction, which makes the final shape feel more natural. Instead of seeing the individual blocks that were used to build the wave, the viewer sees one enormous body of water frozen in motion. The hidden supports do all the technical work behind the scenes, while the visible result remains focused entirely on the illusion of a gigantic tsunami. While the water is spreading across the tsunami, I also need to control what happens at its base. Water naturally looks for the lowest available spaces, so even a small opening in the terrain can cause it to escape in an unintended direction and completely change the shape of the scene. I I therefore make several adjustments to the ground underneath the wave, creating a more controlled surface that keeps the water where it belongs. This is similar to the way real landscapes are engineered around water. Canals, reservoirs, flood barriers, and drainage systems all depend on carefully shaping the terrain so that water follows a predetermined path instead of flowing wherever gravity takes it. The difference is that real engineers are usually trying to prevent uncontrolled flooding, while here I am deliberately creating the illusion of one. The same basic principle still applies. Controlling water begins with controlling the surface beneath it. By changing the terrain in strategic places, I can preserve the enormous shape of the tsunami while preventing unwanted streams from spreading across the rest of the build. Once the base has been adjusted, the wave becomes much more convincing because the water remains concentrated around the structure instead of leaking into the surrounding landscape. This is an important part of environmental design in Minecraft because natural-looking scenes often require a surprising amount of hidden preparation. Players usually notice the finished effect rather than the technical work that makes it possible. In this case, the invisible blocks and modified terrain are doing almost all of the practical work behind the scenes, while the viewer simply sees a giant wave suspended above the ground. That contrast between complicated construction techniques and a simple-looking final result is one of the most interesting aspects of building with Minecraft's physics. The builder has to understand how the game treats water and gravity, then use those rules creatively instead of fighting against them. Once everything is contained, the tsunami finally looks like a single enormous mass of water that is about to crash into whatever stands directly beneath it. Beneath this enormous wall of water, I build a small villager house using cobblestone, oak planks, and oak logs. The contrast between the tiny home and the gigantic tsunami is what makes this part of the scene especially effective. In environmental storytelling, placing an ordinary object next to something dramatically larger immediately communicates scale without requiring any explanation. A house is something familiar and human-sized, so viewers can use it as a reference point to understand just how enormous the wave really is. Phew, it took so much effort. Great, my tsunami is ready.
Oh, wow!
Joo-hoo! We're gonna build a tsunami today. I love teaching you how to build something. Mikey has probably already built his tsunami. Mikey, is that all you've built in that time? Are you sure this is tsunami?
JJ, you only know how to offend me. By the way, I tried very hard.
Mikey, but this wave looks so unnatural. It turned out to be too square.
Oh, that's it. Stop judging. Maybe then you'll show me how to build a tsunami.
Of course we ran to the place.
JJ, good luck to you. I'll wait for you at the house.
Thanks, then I'll start. Round 2. I decide to make my tsunami completely different from Mikey's by using lava instead of water. Rather than creating a narrow wave that simply rises vertically, I make mine extremely wide, allowing it to dominate a huge part of the landscape. The scale is important because a tsunami is defined not only by its height, but also by the enormous amount of water involved. In the real world, a tsunami can contain an extraordinary volume of water spread across a massive area, which is why its effects can reach far beyond the immediate shoreline. Of course, lava cannot behave like water in reality, but in Minecraft, it gives the wave a completely different visual identity. The bright orange surface immediately suggests heat and danger, turning the familiar concept of a tsunami into something much more dramatic. Instead of trying to reproduce a realistic natural disaster, I am deliberately creating a fantasy version where the destructive force of a giant wave is combined with the appearance of molten rock. To make the structure more interesting, I build the lava wave using several different levels rather than giving it one continuous flat surface. These steps create a layered silhouette, with some sections rising higher while others remain lower and closer to the ground. Real waves are far more complex than simple geometric walls because their surfaces contain countless changes in height and direction. In Minecraft, using stepped layers is one of the most effective ways to imitate that complexity while still working within the game's block-based limitations. Each additional level creates a new edge that catches the light differently, making the lava appear to have depth. It also prevents the enormous structure from looking like a single rectangular mass. Even though every part is made from identical lava blocks, changing their elevation gives the viewer the impression that different portions of the wave are moving at different speeds. The wider the wave becomes, the more important its overall silhouette is. From a distance, viewers should immediately understand that they are looking at a huge wall of molten material rather than an ordinary pile of blocks. I therefore continue extending the structure horizontally while maintaining the stepped pattern across its length. This technique is similar to building a large-scale sculpture, where the artist first concentrates on the silhouette before worrying about smaller surface details. A strong silhouette allows an object to remain recognizable even when individual details cannot be seen. That principle is especially useful in Minecraft because players frequently view enormous builds from far away. If the outline is convincing, the build can communicate its idea immediately. Here, the broad base and gradually rising sections create the impression of a wave spreading across the landscape, while the glowing lava makes the entire silhouette impossible to miss. As I add more layers, I also make sure that the wave does not become perfectly symmetrical. Natural formations rarely repeat themselves with mathematical precision, and perfectly mirrored sides can make a giant environmental structure look artificial. By varying the height and width of different sections, I create a more chaotic outline that better suits the idea of a destructive event. This kind of controlled irregularity is common in environmental art and landscape architecture. Designers often avoid perfectly straight lines when recreating natural environments because small variations make the result feel more organic. The same principle works here. Some parts of the lava rise higher, while others spread farther outward, creating a sense that the wave is constantly changing shape. Even though the structure is completely static, its uneven profile gives the impression of movement and makes it feel as though the lava has been caught in the middle of an enormous surge. The final sections of the wave continue this multi-level design, gradually filling the landscape with an enormous mass of glowing lava. At this point, the build begins to function almost like a giant piece of terrain rather than an ordinary Minecraft structure. The stepped construction gives the wave a clear visual rhythm, while its extreme width establishes the scale of the disaster. In real tsunami modeling, scientists use large computer simulations to study how waves move across different landscapes, taking into account factors such as water depth, coastline shape, and the energy of the initial disturbance. My Minecraft version obviously does not attempt to simulate those physical processes, but the idea of studying how a huge wave interacts with its surroundings is still reflected in the build. By making the structure large enough to overwhelm the small house underneath it, I create a strong visual comparison between the scale of an ordinary home and the enormous force represented by the tsunami. As the lava wave grows wider, I begin paying more attention to the relationship between its different levels. A multi-step structure works especially well for a build like this because every change in elevation creates another visible layer. Instead of looking at the wave as one enormous surface, the viewer can distinguish separate sections that appear to be rising and falling into one another. This is similar to the way artists construct large sculptures from smaller masses before refining the final shape. Each section establishes part of the overall form, and together they create the impression of one continuous object. In Minecraft, where smooth curves are difficult to reproduce, these stepped layers are an especially useful technique. They allow me to imitate the gradual movement of a natural formation while still keeping every part of the construction aligned with the game's block grid. The lava itself also gives every step a strong visual contrast. Because lava is constantly animated in Minecraft, even a completely static structure can appear to be moving. The bright surface flows visually across the different levels, making the boundaries between the layers much more noticeable. This is one of the reasons animated blocks are so useful in environmental builds. They can provide movement without requiring complicated mechanisms or redstone. Water, lava, fire, and even certain plants can make a structure feel alive simply because their textures change over time. In this case, the effect is particularly dramatic because the animation works together with the enormous scale of the wave. The viewer is not looking at an ordinary wall decorated with lava. The entire wall appears to be made from an active, glowing substance, which makes the structure feel considerably more dangerous. I continue expanding the lower sections so that the wave has a broad foundation instead of appearing to rest on a narrow base. This is important for both the visual proportions and the story of the build. A gigantic wave needs to feel as though it has enough mass to support its enormous height. In architecture and sculpture, this is known as visual weight. Even when a structure is technically supported, viewers instinctively judge whether its proportions make sense. A very tall object with an extremely thin base can look unstable, while a wider foundation makes the same height appear intentional. By giving the lava wave a large lower section, I make the upper levels feel like they are rising from a huge mass rather than simply floating above the ground. The result is much more imposing, especially when viewed from the side where the differences in height become easiest to see. Another thing I focus on is keeping enough variation throughout the wave so that no long section looks completely identical to the one beside it. Repetition is useful for establishing a pattern, but too much repetition can make a large build feel artificial. Designers often solve this problem by creating a basic rule and then introducing controlled variations within it. I follow the same idea here. The wave remains clearly multi-tiered, but the exact width and height of each section changes slightly. Some layers extend farther forward, while others stop earlier and allow the next level to become more prominent. These small differences prevent the structure from looking like a staircase made entirely from lava. Instead, the steps blend into one another and create an irregular silhouette that feels more appropriate for something representing a massive natural force. At this stage, the main body of the tsunami is already enormous, but I continue refining its proportions instead of immediately moving on to decoration. Large builds benefit from this kind of gradual refinement because mistakes in scale become much harder to fix once additional details have been added. Architects often work from large masses towards smaller details for exactly this reason. First, they establish the overall volume. Then, they refine individual sections. And only afterward do they add surface elements. Minecraft mega builds follow the same workflow. If I added decorations too early, I might later discover that one part of the wave is too narrow, or another section is too low, forcing me to rebuild everything around it. By concentrating on the main silhouette first, I can make sure that the entire tsunami has the right proportions before adding the more specialized magma details at its base. The final sections of the main wave are where I bring all of the different levels together into one enormous structure. At this point, the goal is not simply to make the wave larger, but to make sure its shape remains visually convincing from every direction. A build of this scale can easily look impressive from one angle and strangely flat from another, especially when it contains many repeated layers. I therefore continue adjusting the width and height of the different sections so that the silhouette changes naturally as the viewer moves around it. This is an important consideration in sculpture and architecture because large structures are rarely experienced from a single fixed viewpoint. People walk around them, see them from the side, approach them from below, and sometimes view them from above. A successful design needs to communicate its main idea from all of those perspectives. The huge lava wave benefits from the same approach, with its step structure creating different silhouettes depending on where the player is standing. The upper part of the wave receives particular attention because it is the feature that determines how powerful the entire structure looks. If the top were completely flat, the build would immediately lose the impression of movement. Instead, I keep changing the height of the lava blocks so that the crest rises and falls across the width of the wave. Natural waves have constantly changing crests because water is affected by countless forces at once, including gravity, wind, currents, and the shape of the surrounding water. My Minecraft version does not reproduce those forces, but the irregular crest suggests the same idea visually. The highest sections become focal points while the lower areas create transitions between them. This makes the wave feel less like a constructed wall and more like a frozen moment in a much larger movement. Combined with the animated lava texture, the uneven crest gives the illusion that the structure could continue changing even though every block is permanently fixed in place. As I finish the final sections, the contrast between the enormous lava wave and the landscape around it becomes increasingly dramatic. Scale is one of the simplest ways to communicate danger in visual storytelling. A small object can look harmless when placed alone, but putting the same object beside something hundreds of times larger immediately changes its meaning. This is why disaster movies often show ordinary buildings, vehicles, or people next to enormous environmental events. The audience already understands the size of those familiar objects, so they become a natural reference point. The same principle works in this Minecraft build. The landscape provides a familiar scale, while the gigantic wave completely overwhelms it. Even before the smaller details are added, the viewer can already understand that this is supposed to represent an extreme event rather than an ordinary lava formation. With the main structure finally complete, the lava wave now stretches across the landscape as a huge, layered wall of glowing blocks. The multi-step construction gives it depth. The uneven crest suggests movement, and the enormous width establishes its scale. What began as a simple idea, building a tsunami from lava, has turned into a much more elaborate environmental structure because every layer contributes to the final illusion. I intentionally leave the main surface relatively focused on the lava itself so that the next details can have a stronger visual effect. The base will receive a different type of block that can introduce texture and variation without taking attention away from the glowing wave above it. Once those details are added, the structure will feel less like a giant stack of lava blocks and more like a complete fantasy disaster scene designed around the small house beneath it. With the main lava wave finished, I move to its lower section and begin adding magma blocks along the rear side of the base. This creates a gradual transition between the enormous wave and the ground beneath it, instead of leaving a sharp boundary where the structure simply ends. Magma blocks are especially appropriate here because they visually belong to the same environment as lava. Their dark, glowing texture suggests intense heat even when there is no flowing lava covering them. In real volcanic landscapes, the area around molten rock is rarely made up of one uniform material. Solidified lava, dark volcanic rock, ash, and partially cooled surfaces can all appear together, creating layers of different textures and colors. By introducing magma blocks at the base, I can imitate this kind of variation while keeping the entire structure visually connected to the lava above. I place the magma blocks in different sections rather than creating one perfectly straight line along the bottom. This makes the transition look more organic and helps the base follow the irregular shape of the wave. Repeating one identical pattern would make the structure feel too artificial, especially because the main wave already has a very geometric stepped construction. Natural environments are full of irregular boundaries where one material gradually meets another. Beaches, cliffs, volcanic fields, and riverbanks all have constantly changing edges rather than perfectly straight borders. The same principle can make Minecraft landscapes more convincing. Even though every magma block has exactly the same texture, changing its position and height creates visual variety. The viewer begins to interpret the individual blocks as fragments of one larger heated surface rather than separate decorations that were simply placed around the wave. To make the base even more interesting, I also use shaped magma blocks with angled surfaces. These blocks help break up the strict right angles created by the ordinary cubes and introduce forms that resemble slopes or pieces of rock. In a build dominated by large rectangular steps, even small angled elements can have a noticeable effect because they soften the transition between different levels. This is similar to using bevels in 3D modeling. A perfectly sharp edge can make an object look artificially assembled, while a beveled or angled edge creates the impression that the material has been shaped, worn, or formed naturally. The magma variants serve a similar purpose here. They do not change the basic silhouette of the tsunami, but they add another layer of detail that makes the base appear more like a hot, uneven surface surrounding the main wave. I continue placing these different magma blocks until the entire rear base has enough variation to connect naturally with the lava above. The darker material creates a useful visual hierarchy as well. The brightest lava remains the main focal point, while the magma blocks act as a supporting layer that gives the structure depth. Good environmental design often relies on exactly this kind of hierarchy. Not every part of a scene should compete for attention at the same intensity. Some elements need to stand out, while others provide texture and context in the background. Here, the glowing lava represents the overwhelming force of the tsunami, while the darker magma forms its heated foundation. Together, they create a more complete scene and make the enormous wave feel as though it has a physical base rather than simply ending abruptly above the ground. With the enormous lava wave and its magma-covered base finished, I decide to bring the house from Mikey's build into my own scene. Instead of rebuilding the entire structure manually, I use a command to copy his house and place it directly underneath my tsunami. Commands like this are incredibly useful for large Minecraft projects because they allow builders to duplicate an existing structure while preserving its proportions and details. In real architecture, a similar idea can be found in modular construction, where sections of a design are produced from an established template instead of being recreated completely from scratch. The advantage is not only speed, but also consistency. By copying Mikey's house, I can keep the recognizable structure while changing its surroundings to fit my version of the disaster scene. Placing it beneath the lava wave also creates an interesting contrast with the original build. The same small house that stood beneath Mikey's water tsunami is now placed under an enormous wall of molten lava, showing how two builders can use the same basic idea to create completely different interpretations of the same theme. After positioning the copied house beneath the wave, I make a few additional changes to adapt it to the new environment. Even when a structure is copied perfectly, it does not automatically fit every new location, because the surrounding terrain, scale, and composition can be completely different. I therefore make small adjustments so that the house sits naturally beneath the enormous lava formation instead of looking like it was simply pasted into the scene. The build now combines the gigantic multi-layered wave, the glowing magma foundation, and a familiar Minecraft home into one dramatic disaster scene. Great! My tsunami is ready! It's time for me to show it to the guys.
Hey JJ, is this my house? It all looks very dangerous.
Mikey, I hope you like my building. Well, I think it's time for us to finish.
Yes, JJ, you're right!
Subscribe and like. Bye-bye.